Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. Tonight I'm playing NBA Jam for the Sega Genesis. I'll probably attach some footage of the Super Nintendo version to the end of this video. The Super Nintendo version is actually the version I originally had back in the day. I did get the Genesis version some months after I got the Super Nintendo version on sale. But I think the Genesis version is the one that people know best because, it sold the most. Um, and honestly, I think it's the one that's aged the best compared to the Super Nintendo for reasons which I will point out as we go ahead and jump into gameplay here. I'm going to change one setting, however, in the options menu. Attempt to anyways. I always forget that sometimes you need to push start to actually access a menu instead of the button. So I'm turning on tag mode, which will allow me to control whichever character actively has the ball. I'm going to leave all the other settings on default. Again, this is the original NBA Jam, not Tournament Edition. I do believe that Tournament Edition is the better game, but this is the version that people know the most, and it's the one that got us thinking about NBA Jam as a series, so it's the one I'm playing. I do like the selection of teams here. Yeah, at the time when this came out, Seattle had a team, and now they don't. And because of that, I no longer watch the NBA because I'm originally from Seattle. So no matter how Oklahoma City does, the NBA is dead to me until they put a team back in Seattle. All sorts of Hall of Fame players here. We got Scottie Pippen for the Bulls. Alonzo Mourning is there for the Charlotte Hornets. Patrick Ewing for the Knicks. Of course, Sean Kemp on Seattle there. Clyde the Glide Drexler for the Portland Trail Blazers. There's Barkley for the Phoenix Suns. Everybody knows Charles Barkley. Lakers had James Worthy and Vlade Divac. So I'm going to go ahead and pick my favorite home team, Seattle. Since this is the original NBA Jam, I can only pick from two characters, and it's basically Kemp and Schrempf. That's okay, though. They're a pretty good team together. Tonight's matchup, Sonics versus Spurs. You'll notice the announcer does not say that. It was only until Tournament Edition that they added more of the arcade sound effects. I didn't try to jump up and block that because I tend to get goaltending penalties when I do. One thing I do like about this game is the control scheme is very simple. Uses 3 buttons. You have a turbo button, a shoot button, and a pass button. And the shoot and pass buttons double as a jump/block button and a steal button. One of the things about NBA Jam that really set it apart from other basketball games at the time is it has a very arcade feel. Okay, yes, NBA Jam was an arcade game, but what I mean by that, it's very casual, it's very pick up and play, it's not 5-on-5. Just the 2-on-2 nature and the simplified controls and the over-the-top nature of it made it very accessible and very popular in a short amount of time. I believe the arcade game came out in mid-93, and ports of the game started coming out in 94, 95. It was ported to everything back in the day. The Genesis version, I think, was the best-selling version of the game, followed closely by the Super Nintendo. But there were ports for the Sega Genesis, the Sega CD, the 32X. Eventually, when Tournament Edition came out, that was ported to everything. The plain old NBA Jam that I'm playing here definitely has the more user-friendly AI. It does have computer assistance, so if you start getting too ahead of the computer, it will try and balance things out as we finish the first quarter there. Whereas NBA Jam Tournament Edition turned that up, and the computer is very happy to destroy you in that game if you let your defense lapse. The main differences between the Genesis version and the Super Nintendo version: the Genesis, the graphics aren't quite as sharp or colorful, but I feel that the animation is a little bit better. The graphical overlay details are more authentic to the day, and there's a lot more voice and just audio in general. The Super Nintendo version does not have any music during gameplay, which isn't necessarily a deal breaker, but when you're playing a home game and there's not a ton of voice because the Super Nintendo had less voice than the Genesis version, you kind of notice the silence. And actually, all you end up hearing is the sound of the shoes on the paint. One of the tricks to this game is if you hold down the turbo button and rush in real quick after the opponents bring the ball back in, you can usually knock one of them down and steal it. I've kind of fallen off on being able to do that with 100% accuracy, but back in the day I used to be able to do that so well that I would rack up some insane scores. The way the computer assistance works, though, if they have the ball at all and you're up by like 6 or 8 points or more, whatever they throw is going to go in. This is another of those games that just kind of redefined what it was like at the time to enjoy not just playing games in the arcade, because in the arcade you could play 4 players, but also playing at home. You could invite a friend over and play 2 players. If you had the multi-taps that were available at the time, you could actually play 4 players on the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo, and frankly, playing 4 players on a 16-bit system was a rarity, so that was huge. It made NBA Jam a party game. This halftime report's just kind of a gimmick. I do like the Sega CD version of it, in that it's, more detailed, but that port of the game, I don't know. It's a great port of the game, but the load times kind of muddy it up for me. Plus, it came out around the time, like, right before Tournament Edition came out, if I recall correctly. So, if you bought the Sega CD version of NBA Jam, you felt like you were a version behind. Tournament Edition kind of spiced things up by adding additional playable characters and tightening up some aspects of gameplay. Some for the better, some for the worse, depending on your point of view. And then Acclaim and Midway got into kind of a battle over the rights to the NBA Jam license. Kind of a nasty thing over that. So we ended up getting NBA Hang Time as the next game in the series, and that game's actually pretty good as well. You really can't go wrong with any of the games based on the NBA Jam engine. They just get better and better. At least until NBA on NBC came out, that was kind of a train wreck. Depending on how you tally it, the NBA Jam franchise, I believe, back in the day, sold about 8 to 10 million copies all told, which is pretty impressive for a sports game with that doesn't have John Madden's name attached to it. If you're wondering why the Genesis version outsold the Super Nintendo version back in the day, when usually it was the opposite, back in the day, sports games were known to be better on the Sega Genesis, even though it didn't have the same graphical color palette, so the graphics usually didn't look as sharp or as colorful. The beefier processor meant that you didn't have to sacrifice as much in the way of gameplay. You got more action, more players on screen, and Sega would sign these cushy deals with companies to get them to make the games on their system as well, so they'd put more effort into sports games on the Genesis. It was a long time before, for example, an EA Sports game on the Super Nintendo was just as good as on the Genesis. So when NBA Jam came out, people assumed the same thing, and in a way, rightly so. They assumed that NBA Jam would be better on the Sega Genesis, and so that's the one that sold the most. And it kind of bore out. I mean, as I said, I originally owned the Super Nintendo version, but once I played the Genesis version, I realized, wow, okay, yeah, this game has more voice from the arcade. The gameplay is just, a little bit smoother, and I don't know, it just feels more like NBA Jam. The Genesis footage here won't be very long. Oh, gotta love the backboard break. That's the other thing. Um, my cartridge of NBA Jam here is one of the earlier released cartridges. There are two versions of it, and I'm not sure if you can tell them apart uh, by any means, but they took away the ability to break the backboard in later versions of the game because the NBA didn't like that. So in Tournament Edition, you can't break the backboard at all, which I thought was total BS. The character roster is interesting as well. Um, if you aren't aware of who was playing for what team back in those days, I think the key thing I'll point out, for example, Michael Jordan used to play for the Chicago Bulls. Everybody knows that. But he wasn't in NBA Jam because they didn't want to pay for his likeness. And all throughout the game's history, the arcade version had a different set of players than the home games. And even the different arcade updates would have different character rosters throughout the life of NBA Jam, even. And I'm not talking between Jam and Tournament Edition, which, would certainly switch rosters if they needed to. But just NBA Jam itself, if they had a board revision, that next board revision would either add some players or lose some as licenses expired, or they had to renew rights for another iteration of the game. And the same thing carried through to the Genesis, Super Nintendo, and other 16-bit ports. There were also a number of hidden characters, many of which made it home in the home versions of the game, that you have to enter special initials and do special codes to play as. Like the characters from Mortal Kombat, Bill Clinton, things like that. Supersonics win the game! So that's a quick playthrough of NBA Jam for the Sega Genesis. It does have a championship mode in it that you can, play through to win the NBA title. It's not very heavy on modes. It was meant to be a more pick-up-and-play arcade-style affair, and I think it very much succeeds at that. Tournament Edition definitely has more bells and whistles, but this is the version of the game that I remember the best. So I'll kind of continue my commentary when I fire up the Super Nintendo version of the game. So if you're feeling up to sticking with me, we'll pick that up in a few seconds here. All right, here we are with the Super Nintendo version of NBA Jam. As I said, this is the version of the game that I originally owned back in the day before I picked up the Sega Genesis version. I believe the Sega Genesis version is the superior version of the original NBA Jam, but I think we got to give equal time to the Super Nintendo because it has some palpable differences. I do love the intro music on the title screen here. Considering it's basically the only music in the game, it better be good. Once again, I'm going to go into Options, turn on Tag Mode. That way I can control whichever player has the ball. I'm not going to enter my initials for record keeping, although again, that is a good way to play as some hidden characters. Right off the bat, you notice the color depth and graphical fidelity is better than the Sega Genesis was. Charles Barkley actually looks like a human being here. The character rosters between the two games are roughly the same. I can't remember. I want to say there were one or two players that were changed, but it's not coming back to me now. Again, I gotta play my boys, the Seattle Supersonics. As we get into the game, kind of keep a listen to the audio. That's where the biggest differences are. You'll notice that the cheering is louder, and the voices are clearer. And you can hear shoes on the court, which is either a good or a bad thing. Unfortunately, there is no music playing, and that kind of dulls things out a little bit. Even though it does make things a little more dull, I played the hell out of this game back in the day. NBA Jam was probably the biggest sports game of its time. Well, okay, apart from John Madden Football, but except for John Madden Football, NBA Jam was the biggest sports game of its time. I think it just made sports games more accessible to the average player, the average consumer, as evidenced by the fact that after that we ended up getting games like NFL Blitz. I think they even made an NHL style or an NHL game in this similar style, but I'm not too big on hockey, so I don't know exactly. Computer assistance is kicking in there. The controls and the motion of the players in the Super Nintendo version of the game is slightly less fluid than the Genesis version, and it's not something you necessarily see. I mean, I think you might be able to see it a little bit, but it's definitely something you can feel if you jockey between the two games like I have this evening. They're going to steal a ball, probably. Oh, wow. Had to do that, though. I probably could have just shot a three-pointer and went for it. I'm actually surprised they didn't steal the ball there. In Tournament Edition, they would steal the ball if you were under 10 seconds for sure. It's a shame there's no music during gameplay because, there is music during the intermediate screens and the title screen. This is by no means a bad port of the game. I feel like both games sold roughly 1 million copies. Maybe the Genesis version sold 1.2 million copies. I'm just going off fuzzy memory there. Trying to remember what I read in a Game Fan magazine back in the day. Which, if you've never seen that magazine, do a internet search for Die Hard Game Fan, and as long as you don't find the Ace Combat scandal, the history on that magazine is really awesome. That magazine came out, and right out of the gate, it became the favored magazine for video game enthusiasts. EGM and Ziff Davis always like to claim to be the #1 source in this and that, but Game Fan kind of ate their lunch for at least a couple of years. Unfortunately, their publisher wasn't very well funded, and the internet came along and really screwed things up for them, and so they're gone. The significance of NBA Jam to me back in the day was it was just one of those games that, when we weren't playing Street Fighter in the arcade, we were playing NBA Jam. And it's one of those games that you could get anybody to play. Like, I could not get all of my friends to play Street Fighter with me, but if I was in an arcade and I brought somebody with me, I could get them to play NBA Jam no problem. I knew that wasn't going to make it in. The other thing you can't easily tell is the announcer for NBA Jam, I believe, is supposed to be Marv Albert, who was a very uh, well respected announcer for the NBA for some time until he had a bit of a naughty Louis C.K. style scandal. Marv Albert got canceled before Me Too was a thing. I remember playing the hell out of this game back in the day. I didn't have a multi tap until Tournament Edition came out, but even just two players, this game is a load of fun. Oh, stole the ball from me, jerk. One of the things that's cool about the NBA Jam franchise and sports games in general is that nowadays, since there are so many enthusiast hackers out there, uh, people are constantly finding these old ROM files and revising them to update them with modern rosters. If you look hard enough, you can find a file for NBA Jam or NBA Jam Tournament Edition that has players such as LeBron James and Kobe Bryant in it. Or you can find a classic version of NBA Jam that at least has Michael Jordan in it, as we all wanted to play back in the day. Yeah, those likenesses and stuff, the licensing rights were no joke back in the day. NBA Jam Tournament Edition, even though it had more players you could pick from on each team, a lot of the big names started disappearing because Midway and Acclaim didn't want to pay the money to license the players. I always felt that was pretty short-sighted of them for a game that was going to make them a ton of cash. But hey, what do I know? I was just a kid back then, just entering college, and I was going in for a computer science degree that was going to strangely turn into a psychology degree before I was all said and done. So I clearly had issues of my own. The NBA Jam games are not expensive at all to pick up, which is generally the case with 16-bit sports games and sports games in general. Let's face it, when the rosters are stale, that's about it for a sports game. So you can pick up both versions of NBA Jam, the plain old version or the tournament edition for either the Super Nintendo or Genesis, loose for under $10. If you want them complete in box, you'll have to pay a little bit more, but it's not bad compared to certain games. And I actually think because they're so easy to pick up and play, they're actually worth owning. They're a decent addition to a game library. Of course, they're more fun for those of us who remember these players from back in the day. I'm trying to do a bunch of dunks so I can try and break the backboard again, but I don't recall if this copy I have allows me to do that, or if they just straight up took that out of the Super Nintendo version of the game. I can't remember, so we'll find out together. I'll try and do as many dunks as possible in the fourth quarter here. What a great flying dunk there. Yeah, I want to say they had fixed the Super Nintendo version so you couldn't break the backboard even in its earliest version of the game. Oh, maybe I'm wrong. There we go. That's awesome. Okay. So this is definitely a early revision version of the Super Nintendo game. That's cool. I hadn't remembered that. I'm glad I have this copy. But like I said, they did patch that out of later print runs because the NBA raised a stink about it. They didn't want their players doing it, so they didn't want people to be able to do it in video games. Of course, these are the same people who let Howard Schultz move the Supersonics from Seattle to Oklahoma City, so yes, David Stern, I'll never forgive you for that, nor will the people of Seattle. I don't even live in Seattle anymore, and I still hate him for that. All right, and with that thrilling victory, that is the Super Nintendo version of NBA Jam. I'm going to edit these two together so that you'll see both the Sega Genesis and Super Nintendo iterations of NBA Jam. Thanks for joining me on the playthrough of these. I hope you had a decent time. I don't know that I'm going to do Tournament Edition. I think Tournament Edition is the superior edition of NBA Jam, so if you have a preference of getting just one version of NBA Jam, get Tournament Edition for the Sega Genesis. You won't be unhappy. Apart from, or actually, honestly, get Hang Time. It's even better. But aside from that, I'm just gonna hit the button here and say see you later. So hey, see ya.